Okay, so ready to dive into something pretty heavy today.
Yeah, definitely. Always prepared to dig deep, though.
It's the 2008 Kirkwood City Council shooting.
Kirkwood, Missouri, right.
Exactly. It's one of those events that just sticks with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tragic, complex, the kind of thing that deserves a closer look for sure.
And we've actually got a lot to work with, a good mix of news articles, historical records. So the goal today is to kind of go beyond just what the initial headlines were, really try to understand what led to this, what happened during, and, well, the aftermath.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. These kinds of incidents, they're rarely just straightforward, isolated events. Usually there's a lot more beneath the surface.
So much more, yeah. So let's actually start with February 7th, 2008.
The day of the shooting itself.
Right, around 7:00 p.m. Central Time. The setting is Kirkwood City Hall, a public city council meeting, just starting like any other.
Seems so ordinary, right? And yet,
Well, and tragically, the violence actually began even before the gunman entered the council chambers.
oh, right, with Sergeant William Biggs.
Yes. Charles Lee Thornton, Cookie Thornton, as he was known, 52 years old, he encountered Sergeant Biggs outside.
Thornton had parked his van nearby on a side street, and Sergeant Biggs was, I believe, just walking across the street. I think he was heading to grab some dinner or something.
Such a normal, everyday thing.
Yep.
And in the parking lot, Thornton confronts him, shoots him.
With a .44 Magnum, a Smith & Wesson Model 29, specifically, according to reports.
It's just so sudden. And Sergeant Biggs, even while being attacked, he manages to activate his distress signal.
Wow, that really shows you how quickly everything unfolded. Yeah. And just the instinct to try to get help even in that moment.
It's incredible. But sadly, Sergeant Biggs didn't survive. And then Thornton takes his handgun. It was a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber.
So he's now armed with 2 weapons, and he enters City Hall.
Walks into this public meeting.
Yeah.
What happens next is, well, it's hard to even describe.
The council chambers. There were about 30 people there. Council members, city staff, people from the community, just starting their meeting. The Pledge of Allegiance had just finished. Mayor Mike Swoboda was about to start things officially.
And Thornton enters from the back, quietly, concealing both guns.
He then moves closer, gets close to his targets, and just starts firing.
It was chaos, and the people who were killed, it's almost impossible to comprehend. Police Officer Tom Ballman,
Public Works Director Kenneth Yost, Council Member Michael H.T. Lynch, Council Member Connie Carr.
and then, of course, Sergeant Biggs from earlier. It's 5 lives lost right there at the scene.
A devastating loss for Kirkwood. And on top of that, Mayor Mike Swoboda and a reporter, Todd Smith, they were shot and wounded.
The mayor was shot twice, in the head. At first, they thought he was dead.
Awful. And reporter Smith was shot in the hand.
There were reports that Thornton, during the shooting, shouted, "Shoot the mayor!"
Yeah, that does seem to indicate that Mayor Swoboda was a specific target.
Absolutely. Although, obviously, others were caught in the crossfire. It's worth mentioning that the city attorney, John Hessel, he actually threw chairs at Thornton, tried to slow him down.
Wow, that's incredible.
And it gave him a chance to escape, thankfully.
So much happened so fast.
And all this is happening while the Kirkwood Police Department building is just across the parking lot.
They must have heard the gunfire immediately.
2 officers responded right away, rushed into the council chambers.
Thornton was hiding behind a desk. He fired at them.
And they fired back. Thornton was killed there, 2 gunshot wounds.
So, just to recap, we have 5 people dead at the scene, plus the shooter himself.
Plus 2 others wounded. And tragically, the death toll would actually rise later.
Right, we need to remember each person affected. Tom Ballman, the police officer, he was just 37. Kenneth Yost, the public works director, he was 61.
Councilmember Lynch was 63. Councilmember Carr was 51. And Sergeant Biggs, the first victim, he was 50.
And reporter Todd Smith, who was shot in the hand, thankfully he recovered quickly.
Yeah, but Mayor Swoboda, his injuries were so severe. He was 69 years old. 2 gunshot wounds to the head.
I can't believe he even survived the initial shooting.
He went through multiple surgeries. There were reports that he was starting to recover, even that he didn't remember the shooting.
Wow.
He was even able to go back to City Hall briefly a few months later, but
his injuries, and he was also battling cancer, it was all just too much.
he passed away 7 months after the shooting in hospice care. So in the end, 7 lives were lost, including the shooter.
It's heartbreaking.
Well, let's try to understand Charles Lee Thornton, Cookie Thornton, a little better. He was from the area, right?
Yeah, a lifelong resident of Needham Park. It was this predominantly African-American community right next to Kirkwood, but unincorporated.
Unincorporated, meaning?
Meaning it wasn't officially part of the city of Kirkwood. It had its own separate governance.
Yeah.
But that changed in 1992. Meacham Park was annexed by Kirkwood.
Ah, so suddenly they were under Kirkwood's rules and laws.
Exactly. And that's a key part of the context here, because before that, Meacham Park didn't have to follow Kirkwood's municipal codes.
And it seems that Thornton, before all this, he was actually involved in Kirkwood's civic life.
Yeah, he even ran for city council in 1994. Didn't win, though.
So, not always at odds with the city. But things seemed to change in the late 90s with the commercial development in Meacham Park.
Right, that development used eminent domain. Basically, the government could take private property for public use, even if the owner doesn't want to sell.
And Thornton, he had a construction company, right?
Yeah, and at first, he supported the development, probably figured he'd get some contracts for the work.
But he didn't get those contracts, did he?
Apparently, not as many as he expected, or maybe as many as he felt he was promised. There's some talk about that from family and friends. He got bitter, felt like he was being treated unfairly.
And in '99, he filed a complaint with the EEOC.
Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He claimed there was racial discrimination in how the contracts were awarded.
But the thing is, former Mayor Marge Schramm, she said the city didn't actually award those contracts.
Right, it was the developers who decided.
So Thornton might have been aiming his anger at the wrong people.
A misunderstanding of the process, perhaps? But regardless, this seems to be when the conflict with the city really escalates.
Because after this, there's a long history of code violations, legal problems.
Starting in 1996, he was cited for violating Kirkwood's city codes. Then in '98, he pleaded guilty to 6 violations, agreed to a plan to fix the problems.
But that plan never really happened, did it?
Nope. And the citations just kept coming. Over 100 guilty pleas or findings of guilt by 2002. Different courts, city and county.
Unlicensed business, illegal dumping, parking violations. It was a lot more than just a few small things.
And he had to pay almost $20,000 in fines and court costs. Even filed for bankruptcy in '99, but didn't follow the repayment plan.
And during all this, he's constantly at city council meetings, using public comment to air his grievances.
Claimed he was being targeted, persecuted.
And he kept suing the city. And the public works director, Ken Yost, did all this himself in court, even though he wasn't a lawyer.
Starting around 2004. And the Missouri Court of Appeals even said one of his legal briefs was basically impossible to understand.
You know, the city actually offered to waive his fines.
Seriously.
Yeah, if he'd drop his lawsuit and stop disrupting meetings. But he refused.
It's like things were just too far gone by then. Too much bad blood.
And then there was the assault conviction in 2002 against Ken Yost, the public works director.
Right, that definitely shows how the anger was escalating.
And even at city council meetings, he was arrested twice in 2006. Disorderly conduct.
They even talked about banning him from the meetings.
The city council considered it, but ultimately decided against it. Mayor Swoboda said they wouldn't tolerate disruptions, but they still wanted to hear from residents.
Makes sense, trying to balance things.
But Thornton's behavior was getting worse. In 2007, he got into it with a restaurant owner, charged with assault for that.
Was he picketing the restaurant or something?
Yeah, picketing. And his lawsuits continued, even in federal court. First, he sued for $350, then tried to change it to $14 million.
Wow, that's a jump.
The court said no, of course, and the original lawsuit got dismissed shortly before the shooting.
But Thornton apparently still thought he would win millions.
It's like he couldn't let it go. And then a big turning point, I think, is when the federal judge dismissed his free speech claims.
When was that?
End of January 2008, just a few weeks before the shooting. The judge basically said that because of Thornton's past convictions, he didn't have the right to make disruptive, irrelevant attacks at council meetings.
Wow, that must have felt like a huge defeat for him.
After years of fighting, it was all over.
So looking back, it seems like the main things that drove him to this were, well, losing out on those business opportunities.
The constant battles over parking tickets and code violations, his anger at the city government in general.
And the final blow of losing in court.
It's just this long, complex buildup of resentment and frustration.
A perfect storm, almost.
Now, after the shooting, Thornton's brother, Gerald, spoke to CNN.
What did he say?
He said his brother felt like his constitutional rights had been violated. Described the shooting as war with the government, not just some random act.
Interesting. And it's worth noting that Gerald himself had a criminal record, too.
Thornton also left a note, just one line. The truth will come out in the end, or something very close to
A
that.
suicide note, most likely.
Probably. And then his other brother, Arthur, and his family, they issued an apology, said they were deeply sorry for what Charles had done.
It's hard to imagine what they must have been going through.
The day after the shooting, the Meacham Park Neighborhood Association held a meeting. Thornton's mother was there.
Oh, wow.
And some people at the meeting talked about how there was a big divide between Kirkwood and Meacham Park. They felt like Thornton's anger, even though he took things to a horrific extreme, maybe it resonated with some people in the community.
That makes sense. The annexation, the history there, probably played a role in all this.
And of course, Kirkwood was in shock, mourning. Flags at half-staff, prayer services, vigils, memorials.
The whole community trying to process this terrible loss.
And then in 2014, a documentary film came out, Elegy to Connie. It focused on Thornton, the racial tensions, and especially on Connie Carr, the council member who was killed.
Trying to make sense of it all, even years later.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's clear that the Kirkwood City Council shooting was so much more than just a single event. It was the result of years of conflict, resentment, maybe even some deeper community issues.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, how can things like this be prevented?
It's about recognizing the warning signs, the underlying tensions, understanding that seemingly small things can build up and lead to something truly awful.
And recognizing those points of friction between people and their local governments.
Right. Those moments where communication breaks down, where trust erodes. Maybe those are the places where we need to focus our attention.
To prevent another tragedy like this from happening again.
Exactly. Well, that's something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.